This is the American Law Journal.
Small business. The news has been so bad for so long, but hang in there. If your congressman and your banker won't help you, maybe your lawyer can. Good evening, I'm Christopher Naughton, and welcome to the American Law Journal. And tonight, we look at mom and pop on the brink, small business bankruptcy. Three lauded guests return to the set after a very long absence. Let's go ahead. Let me reintroduce them. Dexter Case is with us again with Case, DiGianberardino, and Lutz. He is well known in both creditors and debtors circle for his bankruptcy work. Dexter's main focus is in small business bankruptcy, but he and his partners also represent debtors in individual and business chapters 7, 11, and 13. The Honorable Judith Wismer is with us. And one thing has not changed in 4 years. Judge, you are still the chief judge of the Bankruptcy Court of the state of New Jersey, a position you have held since 1995. And Timothy Dugan is with Stark & Stark, and he's chair of the Bankruptcy and Creditors' Rights Group for Stark & Stark. He represents mortgage companies, the banks, and the lenders. So let's start here. It has been 4 years since I've seen you folks, and a lot has happened. As a matter of fact, the last time we were here on the set, George W. Bush was still president. The economy wasn't falling off a cliff. It was going into a deep ravine the size of the Grand Canyon. We've been told that Main Street is what we were hoping to help after this fiscal debacle in 2008. Has Main Street been helped? I'm talking about individual debtors. I'm talking about small businesses. Where are we in these last 4 years, Tim?
Well, what I think in the last 4 years is we found a lot of the small businesses have done as much cutting as they can. They've cut back on payroll, they've cut back and become more efficient. Now the problem is can they grow their business and get sales? And they're running into the cash flow crunch. And I think what we're seeing as people get behind, they're struggling to come up with any type of reorganization plan because the cash flow isn't there.
But what I'm talking about is we know that Wall Street got bailed out. We had TARP, we had the stimulus package. What I want to know is, where did the government and where did banks help the individual debtors in the last 4 years? Small mom and pops, individuals, did they get the help that we promised them?
Absolutely not. And I can't say that strongly enough. I mean, it's the opposite. The banking regulators and the small banks that basically took the hit for the big banks as part of the bailout, anybody that got TARP money got all the regulation crammed down their throat, and they've been basically frozen in place. We have not seen any kind of economic growth. And frankly, I don't think bankruptcy has anything to do with it. At that level, what we're talking about is banks that can't loan money. Can't loan money or won't loan money? Well, we got two things. And we talk about, one of the things that I'm sure we're going to talk about tonight are these loan modifications and things like that. The only people that qualify for modifications are people that can afford it.
Judge, let me ask you, and I know this may smack of politics and you may have to demur, and I understand if that's the case, but You've watched the numbers rise. You've seen what's happened in your courts and courts across the state of New Jersey. Has the little guy been helped out at all? I mean, a lot of them were promised, look, you're a small business, you're the backbone of our economy here in the United States. We're going to help you out. We're going to give you a little bit. The courts are going to help you out. We're going to stretch things out. The banks are going to help you out. The government may file or funnel some money into certain tributaries that are going to help you, Mr. and Mrs. Small Businessman. Now, can you comment on that? Again, you've got the HON in front of your name.
Well, absolutely. I think that the reality is that the amendments that went into effect in 2005 unfortunately had a negative impact on small business. They imposed additional burdens on small business in connection with filings that caused the process to be more expensive for them and more challenging from the standpoint of succeeding in reorganizing. There are deadlines, there are reporting requirements, there is a framework that really does make it more difficult, shockingly, because every political actor we've understood for many years has recognized the critical role that small business plays in our economy.
Sure, we hear it from every politician.
Right.
And so my question is, have they been helped? And if I'm hearing you correctly, if I'm hearing Dexter correctly, they've been kind of hung out to dry here.
Well, the process still exists, and they can still take advantage of it, and some small businesses have been helped by it. But the framework has been made more difficult, not easier.
Okay. Tim, how have the banks been helping out the small mom and pops? They realize that they're in a tough flow here. Banks did pretty well with TARP, did pretty well with the stimulus. Wall Street and the banks have done fine. So how have the banks gone out and said, here's a lending hand, mom and pop?
Well, we've been trying to do with most of these cases is sit down early with the borrowers before they get too far behind and see if we can enter forbearance agreements and modification agreements. Sometimes the cash flow isn't there and there's very little you could do. Other times, if they come in with someone like Dexter, they're prepared, you get the financial information, you're able to sit down and do a modification with them. So most of my clients will take an honest look at the financial statements and see if they could help you out, because it's a costly process to go through a foreclosure, Chapter
short
11,
sale, any of those
short
things.
sale.
Right.
A lot of those are not beneficial.
So the banks are going to lose too.
The banks are lose, but what they do need is to make sure that any plan that's presented is feasible,
right,
that the cash flow is there. And that's something that neither side can really control.
Two problems. One is the definition of what is a small business. I think we have people in government that are in control of the regulations and so forth that have one set of definitions for one aspect of it and another definition for another aspect. You can read the bankruptcy code, and I think there's at least 3 or 4.
But why should that make a difference?
Well, because when somebody says we're going to help small business, I mean, I guess you could say that that's not a Fortune 500 company. Is a small business. Right. But the mom and pops, the real small businesses, the ones that are maybe just a little bit too big to file Chapter 13, but way too small to afford the cost and the burden, the administrative burden of a Chapter 11, get caught in the middle. The other thing that's happened is all this talk about bailout and help and modifications and forbearance agreements has raised the expectation of these people. Where's my modification? I don't know how many times I've heard that. I've got to have a modification.
And
I'm paying
6%
interest, and everybody else is paying a 2%.
Right.
You know, where's my modification?
And when Tim is talking about modification, Tim, you're not talking about adjusting the principal. We're not talking about that. That's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a rare case. Generally, we will come in, we will work with you, see if we can give you some short-term relief, maybe roll it in. The banks may ask for additional collateral.
Maybe I'm 3 months over my mortgage, let's say, and I know we're mixing 13 and 11 here, but you know, small mom and pops, they've borrowed, they've got the equity line, what have you. They say, I need another 3 months, give me 3 months. And you're telling me that it's not just the percentage or the interest rate, that banks have also been trying to work with people to maybe stretch it out a little bit.
Yes, and they've been working with them, and one of the requirements that they're making is that the people come in with financials to make sure they at least can show that if that modification is done, you can make those payments.
All right.
And that's where the struggle comes in, is really doing a proper analysis of these small businesses in this environment.
Chapter 11 is a wonderful tool for businesses, and I just can't say enough good things about Chapter 11, but it does not help real small businesses. And one of the biggest problems we have is that a lot of these people that we're talking about have both personal liability and corporate liability. They've created a corporation because their accountant told them it was a good idea 10 years ago. Now we have 2 entities to deal with. And unfortunately, corporations and other kinds of small business organizations don't qualify for Chapter 13.
Right. Now tell, and again, right before we get to some of these calls, Dexter, tell the folks why, again, if you're small mom and pop, why you'd rather go Chapter 13 or Chapter 11. They're both reorganizations. It's not a complete or straight bankruptcy. It's not Chapter 7. You're cashing out, so to speak. You're really trying to
developing a plan.
Stave off. You're going to repay your creditors at a reduced rate. For Chapter 11, it's for the business. Chapter 13 is personal, in broad brushstrokes.
Correct.
But occasionally you have that crossover with mom and pop, once again. And if they could, they'd file Chapter 13 instead of 11. Does it just come down to costs?
Comes down to a couple things. Well, the cost certainly of a Chapter 13 is a lot less. But the impediment to go in Chapter 13, of course, is not only the fact that it only applies to individuals, but the debt limits. Debt limits are very, very low. $1.2 million for secured debt, $300,000 for unsecured debt.
Okay.
A lot of people that have even real small businesses have more debt than that.
Let's go to Roger. We have 2 folks from New Jersey here tonight. Roger from New Jersey, you're up first on the American Law Journal. What's your question for us?
I'm thinking about declaring bankruptcy. I'm not sure which one to do.
Okay.
But
are you? I mean, are you involved in a business, or are you just filing as an individual?
Just as an individual.
Okay. So you're looking at Chapter 7 or Chapter 11, Chapter 13 rather.
Okay.
Probably,
Chapter
right?
7 or 13.
And really, the choices are dependent upon a lot of different things, but the biggest thing you have to look at is the debt limits. If you have more than, once again, $1 million in secured debt, $300,000 in unsecured debt, you're not going to file a Chapter 13. Mm-hmm. So then you're looking at a Chapter 11.
I don't owe anywhere near that.
Right.
My biggest bill is a truck payment I owe. And if I file for Chapter 7 or 11, and would they be able to set up something where I could make smaller payments to them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's say he doesn't want to cash in, Tim, and he's asked a question. I've got this truck, I have payments every month. What can I do with the lender here?
If the lender's not going to work voluntarily with you, a Chapter 7's not going to help. Your best option would be to consider a Chapter 13. Chapter 13 allows what's called a cram down, which you're allowed to take the secured debt, cram it down to the value of the vehicle. A lot of times it depends how much money you owe, what the vehicle is worth, and what the terms are. So Chapter 13 could be a viable option, but without knowing the specifics, I don't know if the plan would actually work.
Right. And again, once again, Dexter, it's always your ratio of debt to your assets and your income.
Right. And there's a few issues when you talk about cram down vehicles. I got the impression that this might be a business-related vehicle, so you wouldn't have the problems that an individual with just their family car would have, for example. So there's a lot of issues, and really complicated, needs to be analyzed a lot more.
Let's go to our first email of the night, and this is pretty basic. My business has been struggling for some time, and I'm getting to the point where I'm considering declaring bankruptcy. I'm not sure if it's the way to go, and I'm wondering if you can tell me the benefits and the ramifications if I take this course of action. So what are the telltale signs of when a small business, when a mom and pop really should start considering bankruptcy? It's almost like they're throwing in the towel. But when should they actually begin looking at that as a feasibility?
I think one of the, and that's a very good question, because one of the problems is oftentimes people will come and see their bankruptcy lawyer too late. As soon as you start having problems is when you have to meet with a good accountant and a good lawyer to take an honest look at your business. Because if you wait too long and you have payroll taxes and you're behind on both your lease and your secured debt, for example, oftentimes the debt's too much, or maybe you've dipped into your retirement account and now that money's gone where that money could have been used in a plan. So I think as soon as you encounter problems, when you have to start looking at it, but the key is to get to the right professionals early so that they can give you, we call it the facts of life speech, which is this is what you can and cannot do in a Chapter 11 or a Chapter 13.
And Judge, that's probably a common theme that you've seen in cases that, again, you've heard over the many years, handling these kinds of matters where you look at it and say, boy, if they had just gotten to someone sooner. If I had a dime for every time a debtor's attorney had told me that for people, filing Chapter 7 or 11 or 13.
Indeed, and I think Tim's advice is very sound. When you're financially distressed, when you don't know what to do, it's very difficult to do this on your own, to figure out what's best for you. The very best thing you can do is to consult an attorney who specializes in this area, an attorney that you are referred to, that you have some assurance knows about this area, because there are complexities. It's not about filling out a form. Some people think that, some people try to make it through on their own, and very few of those succeed, but that's the message. Very, very few. It's a much, much better course to consult, and consult early.
And if by consulting early, it doesn't mean you're going to quote unquote go under. I mean, I think this is probably one of the great misgivings that people have. Should I really go see someone like a Dexter Case? Because if I go to see him, if I go to see a debtor's bankruptcy attorney, I'm admitting to myself that my business is going to fail. Is there some element of that?
Admitting to yourself is one thing, but we do not automatically recommend people file.
Okay.
And
There you go.
Very, very often. We're talking about negotiating forbearance agreements with the secured lenders. And in fact, I would say the majority of the people that I've seen in the last couple of years have gone through a process of forbearance at considering any bankruptcy, and many of them never end up in bankruptcy.
That's a positive note. It's nice to hear that. So people should not stall. And I mean, it may even be months out. They might find that they've been running
Sometimes it's years.
Sometimes it's years.
Yes.
And some of the telltale signs. They're running up credit card debt. They're taking money out of their 401k. What else?
Payroll taxes.
Payroll taxes.
Sales taxes.
Okay. Not paying the government.
Any kind of letter from the bank saying that they're looking at your loan.
Right.
You want to get advice immediately.
Gotcha. Tim, you were going to say.
Yeah, I think too, open the chains of communication. What's very important early on is once a bank feels there's a problem, they need updated financial information. They need their phone calls returned because those are red flags that the banks will find very serious. So if you're running into a problem, you have to immediately contact the bank to get them financial information if you're going to sit down and try to work out a forbearance agreement. There's many times we have not been able to work a deal on behalf of the bank simply because we either do not have accurate information or any information at all.
Right. Dave, you're up next. Dave from Eastern PA, what's your question for us?
Yes, I own a company and it's a proprietorship.
I'm sorry,
I have a lot of bills building up.
Okay. You're a sole proprietorship, you said, right? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
So you've got a lot of bills piling up.
And I have a lot of bills piling up, and there's not much work coming in. So I was thinking at this point we might have to go bankrupt, but that take like everything, which is all personal at that point, correct?
Well, this is a good example, Dexter, of someone who might be able to choose Chapter 13 because he is a sole proprietorship.
As a sole proprietor, if you meet the other requirements, certainly you can work your way out of a situation like that. And no, you don't have to give up your assets. You don't have to close your business. You can keep operating the business and over a 5-year period of time, basically work your way out of it.
Right. So, Dave, I mean, is there any way you can see your way out of this? Because, again, in the position you're in, you could file Chapter 13, as Dexter mentioned before, our whole panel mentioned. It's easier. It's not as expensive. Again, it's a reorganization plan. You could keep the flag up there if you wanted to. I guess if
I would love to do that.
You'd love to do it, but you're just not getting the cash coming in. Have you sat down and spoken with a lawyer yet?
Not yet.
All right. This is a good example. This is exactly when you do it. This is the precise example of someone who may stay in the game, may not, may reorganize, what have you. This is when a person like this needs to sit down with an attorney.
Yeah, and I think one of the keys too is not filing too early. You don't want to file too late. You don't want to file too early.
But a good lawyer is going to know not to file too early.
Right. They're going to work with you because if it's not that bad and a lawyer can negotiate with your creditors, they may be able to keep you another 6 or 9 months where your cash flow comes up. We've seen many times where a bankruptcy case, the creditor could come in and get relief from the bankruptcy court to go back to state court, primarily because payments aren't being made. Cash flow is very important in a bankruptcy, and I think if the economy does pick up into next year, if we can get over this fiscal cliff and some of the other problems, you will find some businesses maybe taking advantage of Sandy and the repairs. If you're a contractor but you have too much trade debt, I think meeting with a good lawyer and a good accountant to get the cash flow budget, that'll help you determine when to file and what type of bankruptcy to file.
Let's take a quick look at a very interesting news cast that I saw, a news story I saw recently, because again, the word is that small business is having a tough time. But take a look at this.
As the economy slowly recovers from a deep recession, fewer small businesses are filing for bankruptcy. A new report by Equifax says small business bankruptcies in the United States dropped 36% in the first quarter of 2012 since 2010. The report also...
What about that? I mean, we're hearing such bad stories about how small businesses and mom and pops got gutted here in this fiscal crisis since 2008, and yet that seems like cheery news.
Well, it's not.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that small businesses are doing well. the number of bankruptcy filings often correlate to the degree of availability of credit. And we haven't seen the availability of credit in the last couple of years, a little bit longer than that, certainly since the recession in 2008. So we've seen the filings go down not only with small business, but all across the board, consumer filings and larger cases as well. And there is some correlation. As well, as we've noted, the process is expensive. And there has to be an exit strategy. There has to be a way out of the process, a way to reorganize. And so the fact that small business filings are down doesn't necessarily mean that small businesses are in less financial distress.
And this is another question I think goes right along the path. If I believe a debtor is not reporting all assets or is otherwise not being truthful, what do I do? Judge, let's go to you on that one. What does someone do if they don't think that a debtor's being truthful?
Very important, contact the trustee. There is in the Chapter 7 process a Chapter 7 trustee assigned to the case. In a Chapter 13 process, there is what we call a standing trustee for all Chapter 13 cases in a particular location. And in a Chapter 11, a creditor would call the U.S. trustee's office. There is a website for that. It is important that that kind of information be made known through those channels.
And let's go to another email question here that actually comes from someone who has started up his own business and asked a question. When using a personal credit card for business, can it damage your credit? Is charging up the card to almost the max, but paying it off completely within a couple of days good for someone's credit, or can it hurt? Let me go to you on that, Dexter, not just because he's from Reading, PA.
Well, I think the answer is it depends on other factors. Paying off a credit card sometimes raises concerns with the creditors. I don't pretend to know how the credit reporting agencies calculate the credit scores, but I know that there's certain danger signs that they look for, and one of them is a change in your usual behavior. So if this is not your usual pattern, then you could be setting up a problem.
Mm-hmm. You know, what came up for us during our research, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about, again, the individual debtor, the small business getting some help. Wasn't Congress supposed to have helped small businesses earlier this year? Wasn't there a Small Business Jobs Preservation Act? I did get out of committee. It was supposed to help small businesses. Do we have, I mean, is there any feedback on that whatsoever?
What's a small business?
Once again, right? Well, maybe that's where they ran into problems too, Dexter. I'm not sure.
Well, no, but seriously, the Department of Labor has one. The unemployment people use another. Every government department, it seems, has a different idea of what a small business is. So, yes, some of the job creation, some of the incentives, some of the big programs that the government was able to launch did help small businesses if you consider 150 or 500 employees a small business. But I haven't seen
Probably not. I mean,
with the 10 employees, the mom and pop sole proprietors, the little guy on the corner, not so much.
Not so much. All right, since it's been 4 years since you've all been here, let's just go around the horn and just tell us where we are now and what people who are in dire financial straits have to, quote unquote, look forward to, and compare where we were 4 years ago and the last time we were on this set. If you could, Dexter.
I don't think we're anywhere different than we were 4 years ago, personally. I think there's a lot more uncertainty. There's a lot more talk about uncertainty in the economy. But we were facing worse than the fiscal cliff back at that time. Just it wasn't recognized quite the same way. I don't think, from my perspective, what we're seeing as far as people's problems, business problems, and so forth, the only thing I can identify clearly that has changed is banking. Banking to small business has been a total disaster in this whole crisis, and it's not
because of resistance to loan.
Because of the banking regulations, because of the fact that the banks were forced to put many, many small businesses out of business because their debt ratios, their asset ratios didn't meet par. They were forced to do that. At the same time, they're not lending money to new businesses unless they meet certain criteria. And there's a gap. There's a big gap in between.
Tim, you must have a different opinion.
Well, the difference between now and 4 years ago, I think, is the lack of cash flow. In my entire career, I haven't seen this many cases show up dead on arrival, where the lawyer says we don't even have enough cash flow to file a bankruptcy. And I physically have had debtors slide keys across the table for the business, and then the banks have to go liquidate. So I think one of the major changes is when they don't have the cash and they can't even take a shot at a Chapter 11, then it's just a pure liquidation, and they're negotiating to get off the guarantee. But I think that's the biggest change I've seen is many, many cases now that we see we're struggling even to get into a good forbearance or modification. They just don't have the cash flow.
And Judge, from the court's perspective, what has changed and what do people have to, quote unquote, look forward to?
Well, I certainly agree with Dexter and Tim on their analysis. What I'd like to tell you is what I would look forward to, what I would like to see happen, and that is for Congress to bridge the gap between the Chapter 13 and the Chapter 11 dilemma, the mom and pop, the true small business, to create, and this idea has been floated in Washington without much traction yet, but the idea of creating a Chapter 13-like efficient, inexpensive process for the mom and pop, for the fundamental kind of business that we need to survive when they run into financial trouble. So what I would like to see is further progress in that way.
And maybe, Dexter, they finally come up with a definition of what is and what is not a small business.
Well,
maybe this $250,000 mark will somehow, come into the bankruptcy field as well.
The tools are there for Congress to adopt. We have a Chapter 12 plan that works very, very nicely.
Farmers and fishermen, right?
For farmers. Not so well for fishermen because the debt limits are about half.
I see, okay.
But it does work very well, and it would be an ideal model for, as the judge has said, I mean, it's there. They just need to adopt it.
I want to thank my guests for joining me tonight, giving us some insights into the mom and pop companies on the brink. Dexter Case with Case, DiGianbardino and Lutz, our debtor's attorney. The Honorable Judith Wismer, Chief Judge of the Bankruptcy Court of the State of New Jersey since 1995, and Timothy Dugan, Chair of the Creditor and Bankruptcy Rights Group for Stark & Stark, representing the mortgage companies, banks, and lenders. And for all of us here at the American Law Journal, until next week, case closed.
Tonight's American Law Journal has been made possible in part by Case, DiGianbardino, and Lutz since 1984, providing their clients in southeastern Pennsylvania with professional and competent legal counsel in matters involving personal and corporate bankruptcy, debtor and creditor rights, zoning and real estate development, with 3 offices in Reading, Allentown, and Lancaster. Stark & Stark, developing innovative solutions to meet their clients' needs in bankruptcy and creditors' rights, and in over 30 other service areas. Scheller PC, a nationally recognized personal injury law firm protecting individuals against dangerous pharmaceutical medicine, including antidepressants, antipsychotic drugs, defective products and medical devices, and other personal injury matters. And the Legal Intelligencer, the nation's oldest legal newspaper for lawyers.